At 0317 local time, Ukrainian strike drones carrying 120-gram shaped-charged warheads penetrated the outer perimeter of the command complex. Flying at an altitude of 1,500 ftd and speeds approaching Mach 0.75, roughly 575 mph or 925 km/h, the UAVs targeted radar domes and antenna clusters with surgical precision. Simultaneously, a salvo of 9 air-launched cruise missiles, each with a 450-kilo payload and a unit cost of approximately $2.4 million, broke towards the coordinates. Each missile flew at Mach 0.85 at 30,000 ft before diving steeply to hit the roof structure of the command bunker. Witnesses inside the building reported floor plates trembling. The main data fusion room was punched through. A reinforced slab collapsed under the concentrated strike. Estimated damage: the command center, built at a cost of $3.8 billion USD, now suffered structural compromise and electrical infrastructure catastrophic failure. Operators fled through corridors strewn with debris. Emergency lighting flickered out as backup generators pooped in a hail of sparks. While the cruise missiles cut a swath across the rooftop, a Pia-style swarm of 24 unmanned winged loitering munitions at ultra-low altitude, 100 ft, evaded the remaining air defenses. Each carried a 50-kilo warhead and was directed by Ukraine's long-range drone command network. They soared in low signature profiles, weaving between radar shadows before diving into fuel storage tanks around the command center campus. Russia's reaction? An immediate scramble of surface-to-air missile systems. S-400 batteries activated, jet fighters vectored overhead, air radar domes spun up, but the room for maneuver was minimal. By the time Russia had identified and targeted the inbound drones, many had already reached lethal impact. According to Ukrainian sources, of those 24 loitering munitions, 19 scored direct hits, a hit rate of nearly 80%. Russia reported intercepting only 2 before impact. As the airstrikes thundered in, Ukraine's mechanized battalion on the ground moved. A pair of advanced main battle tanks fired guided projectiles from 2.8 kilometers away into the command center S-Command and Control bungalows. Each tank shell weighed 10 kg, traveled at 1,500 mph, and punched through reinforced walls. At the same time, a series of mobile rocket systems, HIMARS-type launchers firing 227mm rockets with 110-kilo warheads, struck the adjacent logistics hub at an altitude of 0 ft, ground impact, delivering concentrated explosive force. The coordination was flawless. As drones drew off the air defenses, the tanks and rockets targeted the ground layer. A Russian armored company attempted to counterattack, but the road corridor was already covered by Ukrainian-laid anti-tank mines and drone-guided artillery fire. 2 Russian BMP infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed before they closed within 1,000 afers of the target zone. Inside the logistics hub, stored ammunition and armorers' caches ignited. Secondary explosions erupted, sending shockwaves through the command center complex. For Russia, the land assault magnified the airstrike by creating fires and alternate triggering points, rendering the defenses overwhelmed and disorganized. Though the site lay inland, Ukraine extended the campaign to the sea simply to divert and degrade logistical support. A Ukrainian unmanned surface vessel, USV, remote-controlled at 35 knots, navigated into a Russian supply route along the nearby coastal waters. Carrying 2 200-kilo payloads, the USV detonated near a Russian logistics barge, ripping a 6-meter hole in its hull. The explosion disabled the barge's propulsion and navigation. Simultaneously, 2 underwater drones carrying shaped charges breached the harbor perimeter. One lodged against a supply ship S propeller shaft, another against the hull near a fuel transfer line. At 100-meter depth and moving at 8 knots, each underwater drone spent 20 minutes positioning before detonation. The blast triggered a fuel spill and forced Russian naval logistics units to suspend operations for 18 hours. Russia AS Navy scrambled patrol boats and warships in response, but found themselves hampered by Ukrainian littoral missile batteries and drone-guided reconnaissance afloat. The sea domain assault served not only to hit a support node, but to tie up Russian naval resources and amplify the overall pressure on Moscow's rear zones. While kinetic attacks struck air, land, and sea, Ukrainian cyber teams struck the intelligence backbone. At 0401 local time, the Ukrainian Cyber Command initiated Operation Blue Veil, propagating malware into the Russian command center S network. Firewalls were overridden, Encrypted communications were hijacked. Over 12,000 endpoints crashed. In the battlespace operations room, light indicators winked out. Screens went black. A digital blackout ensued, with network defense systems offline. Russian radars, sensors, and air defense links lagged. At one point, the primary radar protector reported 0 contacts for a 10-second interval, a dangerous lull in the air defense net. Ukrainian cyber teams then injected false target track signals. The Russian system locked onto decoy bearings while actual loitering drones slipped in under radar cover. The cyber strike cost an estimated $1.2 million in development and deployment. The financial cost is dwarfed by the effect Russia's ES-layered defense grid was compromised when it mattered most. Russian cyber countermeasures attempted to reboot hardened systems, but the attackers had already poisoned backup channels. A cascade failure followed. Secondary servers shut down, a secondary generator failed, and the command center alarm systems were silenced. One Russian officer described it later as, "The lights died, the voices faded, and for a moment we were blind." Ukrainian command, conversely, pressed the moment hard. Within minutes of the initial strike, Russia attempted a counter-move. An incoming wave of 18 MiG-31K fighters carrying Kh-47K2 variant cruise missiles roared into the skies. Launching from 55,000 FT, these missiles traveled at Mach 2.0, weighed approximately 1,500 kilos each, and carried 715 kilos warheads. The missiles were directed at Ukrainian forward operating bases supporting the drone launch sites. However, Ukraine was prepared. Ukrainian air defense batteries, including NASAMS and infrared-guided missile systems, intercepted 12 of the missiles at altitudes between 25,000 FT and 40,000 FT. Trailing debris rained into open fields. One intercepted missile's blast wave knocked out windows in nearby towns. 4 missiles penetrated the outer ring and struck a fuel storage hold in a combat support base, igniting a fire that consumed an estimated $26 million worth of fuel. One Ukrainian technician was lightly injured. Russia then deployed a second wave, 42 unmanned fixed-wing strike drones launched from multiple staging areas, flying at 2,000 FT and 350 ms speeds, each carrying a 70-kilogram warhead. Their aim, to exploit the gaps in Ukrainian air defense that had been mobilized for the first wave. Ukraine's response was rapid. In the cybersphere, they triggered an electronic countermeasure grid. Jammers and decoys activated, causing 3 of the incoming drones to crash into open terrain beyond the front lines. 4 more were intercepted by portable air defense systems, manpads, operated by Ukrainian infantry. The remaining 35 reached targets, but by then Ukraine had evacuated all high-value assets. Damaged, 2 artillery batteries suppressed for 18 hours, 1 K-something radar system destroyed. Russia declared the strike limited and categorized it as harassment. In the midst of this tit-for-tat escalation, a clandestine Ukrainian squadron deployed what is thought to be the first operational hypersonic glider drone near Russian territory. Launching at 04:45 UTC from a custom rail launcher inside friendly lines, the glider achieved Mach 3.2 at 50,000 FT before diving at 60 degrees into a Russian ammunition depot located 25 kilometers from the command center. Payload 250 kg of a thermobaric warhead. The resultant explosion registered seismic shock at 1.3 magnitude. The debris field spanned 450 meters. Russia had no prior warning. The air defense net was stretched thin post the early strikes. Layered radars were still rebooting. The hypersonic glider penetrated unchallenged. Russian ground crews later found sections of the debris embedded in a bunker door rated to 600 mm of reinforced concrete. One Russian intelligence note stated, "We did not see it until it exploded." The tactical surprise forced a near-panic reaction inside Moscow. Russian General Staff ordered the redeployment of 2 S-500 batteries from the eastern theater into the western flank to counter deeper strikes. Logistics rails were rescheduled. Aerial patrols raised the alert level to Alpha Bravo. But Kiev's momentum was already shifting. Ukraine's coordination and Russian disarray behind the scenes, Ukrainian coordination was consummate. The strike was executed by the 1st Center of Unmanned Systems Forces, formerly the 14th UAS Regiment. Signals intelligence, drone spotting, logistics and strike coordination were managed from a mobile command nest concealed in a forest 15 kilometers behind the front line. Multiple feeds, live drone video, satellite imagery, Intercepted Russian comms were fused into a common operational picture delivered to Ukrainian pilots, artillery units, and cyber operators. Russia, by contrast, was thrown into fragmented reaction. Air defense assets manned by 3 separate commands had limited interoperability. The cyber attack fractured communications and forced emergency protocols. At one stage, the Russian commander on site admitted via open channel that his location had been compromised and he was relocating, citing other commands sending conflicting data, meaning Ukraine achieved unity of command and domain integration. Russia was still operating with stovepipes and compromised communications. That difference amplified the effect of each strike. The $3.8 billion command center might not have been hit if Russia's network had remained intact. Escalation and risk of wider conflict. The next day, Russia launched a retaliatory strike of its own. Using long-range ballistic missiles, Iskander-M, with a range of 500 kilometers and carrying 480-kilo warheads, 6 missiles targeted Ukrainian drone launch facilities on the Western Front, alongside a barrage of 150 reconnaissance drones swarming across Ukrainian territory. Ukraine's air defense sources reported that 78 of the drones and all 6 missiles were intercepted, but traces of shrapnel damaged 3 launch sheds and disrupted operations for 12 hours. Ukraine responded not with mirror strikes, but with strategic patience. They used the earlier damage to force Russia into reallocating air defense resources from active fronts to protect deeper rear areas. That dilution opened new opportunities. Over the ensuing 48 hours, Ukraine's artillery and missile units delivered more than 1,200 rounds at Russian logistics columns using drone-directed targeting. Meanwhile, civilian population centers in border regions became the new front lines for escalation. Russia withdrew some air defense assets and relocated critical systems behind urban zones, complicating the operational calculus and raising the moral stakes. Ukraine's leadership made repeated statements emphasizing the avoidance of civilian casualties and the integrity of international humanitarian law. Strategic reflection and moral dimension. What emerges from this sequence is more than a single strike. It is the shape of a new era of warfare, integrated across domains, networked end-to-end, and demanding both technological agility and strategic coherence. Ukraine's ability to coordinate air, land, sea, and cyber was not incidental. It was the product of adaptation and rigorous training. Russia's failure was as much in command and control as in hardware. On the moral side, both sides now face scrutiny over how prisoners of war and captured drones are treated, how targets are selected, and how civilians are protected. Ukraine's drone units, speaking publicly, emphasize the identification of purely military infrastructure and the minimization of collateral effects. Russia has announced investigations into terrorist acts and vowed to retaliate. However, the shift is clear: strategic depth no longer protects rear areas. The $3.8 billion command center is physically compromised, but symbolically even more damaged. The notion that such a center is invulnerable has been broken. Ukraine's strike sends a message that fixed high-value assets far behind the front lines are reachable. Russia's reaction? Redeploying defense assets, shortening reaction times, moving key nodes underground, indicates acknowledgement of the change dynamic. As the smoke clears, the implications spread farther than this sector of the war. NATO and other actors observe with interest. If a modestly resourced state can execute such a campaign, then future conflicts will depend less on sheer mass and more on integration, autonomy, and domain-crossing connectivity. The war in Ukraine becomes a laboratory, and the lessons will echo globally. In the end, the human dimension remains paramount. Soldiers on both sides face risk from drones, cyber attacks, precision missiles. Commanders must consider not just how to strike, but how to guard against strikes that come without warning across domains. Allies who provide weapon systems must factor interoperability, sensor networks, cyber resilience, and multi-domain coordination. For Ukraine, the operation reinforces the necessity of sustained training, intelligence, and advanced systems. For Russia, the operation may spark further decentralization, hardened underground facilities, layered defense bubbles. But those measures come at cost, and financially, materially, and in mobility. And for the rest of the world, the message is unequivocal. The era of static rear area sanctuaries is over. Command centers, logistics hubs, fuel depots, naval supply lines, cyber networks, all can be struck and will be if adversaries are prepared. The war is no longer fought just at the front line. It is fought across domains, in networks, in real time. As dawn breaks over Ukraine and Russia, both sides count their losses, tally up what remains. The command center lies battered. The sea lanes shudder. Cyber nets flicker back to life. The drones prepare for the next sortie. The land remains contested. And the future of warfare has been rewritten, not with broad scores of boots and tanks, but with networks, sensors, swarms, and precision. The moral reflection. In this new era, the value of human judgment, of restraint, of ethics becomes central. The technology is ruthless, but humans decide when and how to use it. The next wave will test not just force levels, but character. The screen fades out on twilight-shrouded terrain, the hum of drones already faint but persistent. A single voiceover. In the domain where steel meets data, the war is no longer simply fought. It is orchestrated.